Hello everyone, this is part 2 of the Fukushima Ryu Shinobi no Maki, the closing scroll, which we are using the translation refining the intention. Again, I want to remind people that refining the intention is not a direct translation of the final scroll's name. However, we're using refining intention because refining intention carries the meaning, carries the feeling. Sometimes when you do translations, you have to be careful. Translation work is not a definitive process. You're taking something that has been written hundreds of years ago in another language, and you're trying to put it into a different language hundreds of years in the future. There is a lot of you try, of course, to present what is written as directly as possible, but sometimes that means you can't actually use exactly what's written because the context and the connotations are different. Again, we were talking about Japan in 1605-ish or 1602-ish, but the late 1600 basically, between 1559 and 1603, somewhere in here. This is this kind of mindset. The language, it's the who's the target audience. So who is the scroll written for? Who wrote the scroll? When was it written? What was the view that it was written? And what was the purpose that it was written? These 5 factors. Every time something is written, it has those 5 factors. Like I said, the intended audience, the author, the time period, the purpose, etc., etc., etc. Right? So within that context, this was written with those factors in place. Now, hundreds of years in the future, in a different country, in a different language, it's really difficult to say exactly what is intended, what the feeling, what the meaning is. Sort of like the actual meaning behind just the words. To do that, sometimes we have to translate it in a way that is not an exact translation of what's on paper, because an exact translation actually doesn't really carry the meaning into the new language correctly, right? So that's why we're using the name refining intention, or the scroll of refining the intention. The kanji does not say refining intention, but that is the essence, that's the purpose, that is the meaning. When we're trying to get to what's actually being said, it is the scroll for refining the intention so that the creativity of the mind can flourish. Right? So we did part 1. I did an origin discussion, or wannabe podcast, discussing Fukushima Ryu's origin, discussing the House of Fukushima and the House of Nojiri and how this came to be. I might do a follow-up on that one because there's a lot more details that I didn't even touch on. But for the most part, if you watch that, you got it. The House of Fukushima, Fukushima Masanori saw that he was becoming a daimyo. He went from being a retainer, and now all of a sudden he's shooting up through the ranks and money, and now he has this big Hiroshima prefecture. So he says, wow, I'm a daimyo. As a daimyo, I must have to have shinobi. So then he went to the House of the Nojiri, because Fukushima Masanori's one of his chief retainers is Kumazawa Morihisa, and Kumazawa Morihisa is from the House of Nojiri, and so he says, I need I know you guys have shinobi. The shinobi is what you do. You guys, the House of Nojiri, I know that you guys are archers and shinobi. You're excellent at espionage and you're excellent at archery. So therefore, I don't really need you for archery. But I know that you guys make excellent espionage agents and bodyguards. Like, for example, if you look at Oda Nobunaga's retainer list, like at Honoji or Honoji Temple, even though to say G at the end is kind of repetitive because G means temple, so it's Hono Temple, but Honoji. When Oda Nobunaga died at Honoji, he was just with his closest retainers and bodyguards. You'll see Nojiri Hanbei died alongside Nobunaga, right? So that was a position of prestige. You know, if you were one of those bodyguards, that means you're from a family that bodyguards, right? So the Nojiri are known for being bodyguards, but you know, for being shinobi, espionage agents. Kinju, that's a term. You need to look it up. Kinju means a personal retainer who's usually entrusted with bodyguarding, espionage, etc., etc., etc. So Fukushima realized he's going to be a daimyo. You know, he's like, wow, I shot up in just, you know, like 10 years. I went from being like a solid warrior from Owari to now I'm going to be a daimyo of Hiroshima. I must have to have some ninja, you know, not just a couple. Like we need to have a shinobi network because he's a daimyo. Of course you have to have shinobi, right? So he, like I said, he went to Kumazawa Morihisa, his chief retainer, and said, we have to have some ninja. Your house, the Nojiri, are known for their ninjutsu and their archery, but again, don't need the archery. We need the ninjutsu, or the shinobi no jutsu. So then Nojiri Narimasa was selected It's commissioned to form a shinobi system for the Fukushima, so not just for the Fukushima, for Hiroshima Prefecture, for the Hiroshima domain, which would be run by the House of Fukushima. So therefore, Fukushima, right? It only makes sense. The system is commissioned. Fukushima Masanori commissions Nojiri Narimasa to create the system, and the system is created for the purpose of any body who serves the Fukushima is going to train in this structured system. And not only that, the members of the House of Fukushima themselves are also going to train in this. So again, I know I've spent about like 7 minutes recapping that, but a lot of people apparently didn't listen to that wannabe podcast, or they missed it or whatever. So I've just tried to recap everything. It's important to know where this comes from. So that's why Fukushima Ryu exists, right? So there we go. Fukushima Ryu exists because the House of Fukushima needed a ninja system. So the Nojiri were commissioned to create this system, and then it was passed down through the House of Fukushima and the retainers. It's important to know that, because you get a difference between, for example, you have the discussion of like Iga Mono and Koka Mono. Well, this is, while the Shinobi no Jutsu that the Nojiri have does have some Iga in it, it's more properly understood that really people who are serious in shinobi history need to start saying Owari Mono. Iga Mono, Koka Mono, Owari Mono. Because even though the Owari material has some Iga, has some Koga, it also has a lot of Kawachi, which is Eastern Osaka. It also has a lot of like Southern Court material, like Gonan Sho, the Southern Court rebels. It has a whole bunch of its own material just formulated in Owari. So really, you should really view it not as, Iga or Koga. Is it one or the other? Is it Iga or is it Koga? No, you should really understand this as Owari Mono. So this is Owari Mono ninjutsu, This is something different from your typical Iga and Koga. This is Owari. This is where Nobunaga comes from. This is where Toyotomi comes from. This is where Fukushima comes from. Tokugawa doesn't come from Owari, but he comes from Mikawa, which is right smack next to Owari. And Owari is a small province, and Mikawa is right there. So this is it's kind of like, Tokugawa had Hattori, and so Hattori is based on Iga, but even though it's based on Iga, it's still from Mikawa, right? So in a way, yeah, it's Iga, but you could say it's really kind of like Mikawa. But aside from that, even though that a lot of the Nojiri material is based on Iga, still it has so many other influences that it is really best to be considered Owari Mono, something other than something new. This is something that I'm asking the shinobi historian and shinobi enthusiast community to understand. Owari Mono, a whole different category. Owari Mono, everybody always thinks, Iga and Koga, independent from Oda Nobunaga, blah, blah, blah. Alright, fine. But add a third category. Owari Mono, those shinobi who were retainers of Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Fukushima Masanori, Kato Kiyomasa, Hayashi, the House of Hayashi, the House of Sakuma, the Kawajiri. These are all Owari houses, families, houses, Bushi houses from Owari who have an incredible amount of shinobi and shinobi no jutsu in their arsenal, right? And they have their own traditions, etc., etc. So they might have material from Iga, but they are independent of Iga. They are a whole other group. So Owari Mono. It would be awesome if people would start using Owari Mono as opposed to, is it Iga or is it Koga? Guys, there's more than just Iga and Koga. Really, there's a lot more than Iga and Koga. So Owari Mono, right? It's not exactly a historical term, but at this point, looking back, we could easily say Owari Mono without any questions. So, having said that for 11 minutes, I think we should get on with this part 2. What do you guys think? Part 2? Might have to make this part 3. Anyway, so here we go. So here's part 2 of some Owari Mono ninjutsu. So the last time we ended on the fidelity, truth, and the intention, right? That whole idea of always having truth in your heart, honesty, faith, and then following that intuition through the darkness of the methodology of shinobi into the truth on the other side of that darkness. So it's light internally, and then dark methods, and then light on the other side of the dark methods, right? It's like the light of your heart directing to the light of the truth of the outside world, or the actually, here's another where I'm going off today. Inko Ryu, which is the sister system to Fukushima. So you have Fukushima Ryu, and then you have Inko Ryu, which is connected to the Fujii family, which is related to the Nojiri. So you will see that in the Inko Ryu manuals and materials are pretty much the same exact material. In some cases, it's even the same wording as the Fukushima manual. There is a the Fukushima, the Fujii material is the native material to Hiroshima. Like before Fukushima and his Nojiri ninja came to Hiroshima, the Fujii were the shinobi around Hiroshima, right? That system has become known as Inko Ryu, which means guiding the light or directing the light. This principle of directing light is the same principle that I'm discussing now. The light of your heart is directed through the darkness, or the light of the truth of the enemy situation is directed through the darkness by the light of your heart. So it's this idea that there's light on both sides of a darkness, and the force between the two pulling it and guiding it through the darkness is the dynamic that we're talking about here. That is called Inko, which is the directing of the light. So Inko Ryu is named that, actually, Inko Ryu. Whereas Fukushima Ryu is named after the House of Fukushima. Inko Ryu is named after this concept of guiding the light through the darkness. The light of the truth of your heart connecting with the light and the truth of the world, the reality of the world. And the darkness of ninjutsu is like the path it traverses, and it's guided through that path, right? Inko, the directing of light. So now that I've spent 15 minutes on that, I guess we will have to make a part 3. So, part 3 is now coming up.